I stood somewhere in a funeral, and that time William Ruto was being asked to return, the current president, to return some land. And I said, if you want him to return some land, then those others who had already taken land should also return it. And then we had a whole fleet of Subarus and double cabins coming to my house to pick me as a terrorist or a great criminal. And because DCI was groping in the dark, DCI was doing very strange things that should never have been done. The investigating officer, Mr. Chepkok, I think is someone who must be called out for his very unprofessional conduct. They were doing all this stuff at the behest of other people who had political motives. At this stage and time, 60 years after independence, just because, to quote them, a Mzungu walks through the door and says whatever he or she wants to say, it's about time we liberated our minds from this mental slavery and mental colonialism. Because, I mean, a white person is not a god. You are my legal team for the great work that they have done. Shama here and his senior Mbogwa for a job very well done. And I must also thank the court for delivering justice. This particular court, as you will realize, has taken relatively shorter time than most other courts do. A matter of this nature takes 10, 20 years when somebody suffers. I have already suffered enough for those 4 or 5 years. My children have suffered, seeing their father put out there as a thief, seeing their father put out there for all these baseless accusations. I must reiterate what my lawyer has said. This was towards the elections, last general elections. And I believe my adversaries had a lot to do with this particular case, because DCI was groping in the dark. DCI was doing very strange things that should never have been done. The investigating officer, Mr. Chepkok, I think is someone who must be called out for his very unprofessional conduct. They were doing all this stuff at the behest of other people who had political motives. And maybe also, if at all they were innocent, which I don't believe they were, at this stage and time, 60 years after independence, just because, to quote them, a Mzungu walks through the door and says whatever he or she wants to say, it's about time we liberated our minds from this mental slavery and mental colonialism. Because, I mean, a white person is not a god. You must evaluate whatever evidence that is adduced by this person to know that that evidence is correct or not. Secondly, politics should also be played fairly. I remember before this whole saga happened, I stood somewhere in a funeral, and that time William Ruto was being asked to return, the current president, to return some land. And I said, if you want him to return some land, then those others who had already taken land should also return it. And then we had a whole fleet of Subarus and double cabins coming to my house to pick me as a terrorist or a great criminal. And then thereafter I fell out with them, but I did not need anybody's help. I opted to fight out my case to the very end. I did not want to ask anybody to help me, because as a man and as a man of principle, I wanted to fight this out to the very end, and it has come to an end. Thank you very much.
Maintained that these charges were baseless. The charge for alleged stealing, the charge for allegedly making a false document, the charge for conspiracy, the charge for uttering a false document, all those charges. I'm sure you sat through the entire process. You listened to the witnesses, the questioning that we made as a defense, the submission that we rendered, and we are pleased that the court has done justice. You heard that one of the things that even the prosecution did not do was even to call a documents examiner to establish whether the alleged signatures that are said to have been forged or actually forged. We've maintained that this gentleman bought that property, and that is one of the things that the court has established. Paid purchase price, and the money was paid to the estate of the deceased, and documents were processed and issued, and he has a title to the property that he has. So these charges were baseless. In fact, we've continued to question the motive that informed these charges. It is actually surprising that the people who are said to have been the owners of that property, as you've heard from the court, are actually not the complainant. So the person who initiated these charges or who caused these charges to be filed was not even the complainant. The people who are saying that the title was stolen, you heard the court saying there was evidence that they received the purchase price. So really, what was the basis? You recall these charges were brought up during the run-up to the last general elections, if you recall, when that happened. And we believe that the idea was actually to knock out competitors from that contest. It's taken how many years now? Almost close to 3 years since those charges were commenced, and we've been able to demonstrate that Honorable Anthony Mutai Kimaro did not commit those offenses. The alleged offense of stealing, you cannot steal a property that there is already sale agreement that you actually bought. You cannot be said to have conspired or to have obtained registration by false pretense of a property that you actually bought. That is what is surprising, that the prosecution was bringing evidence that was actually exonerating this with this particular individual. So what was the motive? And I think these are the questions that we have to continue to ask ourselves, that is the criminal justice system being used for the intended purpose, or it is being abused? That is the question that we must continue to grapple with, because yes, he has been vindicated almost 3-4 years later, but his rights have been violated. He has been bearing the tag of an accused person. He's a former member of parliament. How is he being looked at by his constituents? Only for the court to deliver a judgment where the court was more or less affirming what the prosecution was saying, that you received money and you're saying someone has stolen a title. You have signed a document and then you're saying you do not know what you signed. So really, these are the questions we must grapple with. So yes, we appreciate that this is a constitutional democracy and laws are there to be complied with. But I think the people who are charged with the responsibility of making decisions whether or not to charge must critically be evaluating the information that comes from the investigators, so that you do not have people undergo a needless trial only for them to be vindicated. Look, yes, he has been cleared, he goes home scot-free. But in the court of public opinion, he's a former member of parliament who had been accused with very serious offenses, 5 to be specific, 5 serious felonies. So it's important that as crime is fought, it is fought in good faith. That is what we continue to maintain. Thank you so much, members of the press. We thank you.
If I may add on to what my very able counsel has said, I must thank